All right, hello and welcome to the video. Once again, my name is Wade Smith, and this video is about practical applications of learning lessons from StarCraft and other real-time strategy games that can be applied to your karate and other martial arts skills. All right. Because when I took karate, the school wasn't just a karate school. It certainly wasn't a competition karate school. It was a real military grade karate school. And they also taught jujitsu with your karate skills. And the jujitsu and the Shorinryu is mostly jujitsu anyway in Isshinryu. So you learn dozens of submissions for each belt rank that you progress in Isshinryu Karate. So Isshinryu Karate is not competition karate that only has, the four basic punches and a couple kicks. All right. Isshinryu Karate has 15 hand strikes and 15 kicks altogether that we practice, not counting the 8 basic blocks. All right, which we also say there are no dedicated blocks in Isshinryu. Every block can be a strike, and every strike can be a block. All right, but the lesson from StarCraft is again about noobs thinking that they can make a X number of minutes no rush rule, and that will somehow help them beat the pros. And as I said, adding rules does not help the noob beat the pro, and taking rules away does not help the noob beat the pro. Because one year around 2001, when I used to do this to the noobs, and just curb stomp 3 noobs by myself in StarCraft, and I can, and if they're below A plus, they're a noob to me. All right, and A plus is the second highest rank. All right, because I'm code S, which is the highest rank. All right, but if they're below A plus, I consider them a noob. All right, and I can beat 3 of them allied against me. So anyway, the noobs thought that if you added a 20-minute no rush rule, that would help them beat me. It didn't help them beat me. I actually beat them even worse in 20-minute no rush than I did in no rules. Because in no rules, I have to play defense right from the beginning, and it takes me twice as long to get my economy going before I can wipe them out. So in no rules, they actually have an advantage over me 3-on-1, because I can beat them 3-on-1 with no allies. I've done it before. All right, if they're less than A plus. And so anyway, so they realized that they could not beat me even with the 20-minute no rush rule. So then their next idea was to suggest that I can't even scout them during the 20 minutes. And they thought that was going to help them beat me too. They thought that if I could not scout them and come on their entire half of the map with like my overlord or my observer or even my worker scout, that I'm not allowed to scout at all. I just have to stay in my base for 20 minutes and build stuff. They thought that was going to help them beat me. So I'm like, okay, all right, let's see if you guys can each somehow make a 200-200 army that will beat what I have by the time you cross the map. And I will have to beat all 3 of you blindfolded with no scouting allowed for me and see if you can beat me then. And I beat them anyway. By the time they were ready to attack me, I had 250 photon cannons, and I had carriers, and I had corsairs, and I had High Templar, and they were all mobbing me, and I mopped the floor with the High Templar and killed half their army, and I had arbiters. All right. And when I play Zerg, I make queens. Hey, pro gamers don't make queens, but I make queens. So when I play Zerg, I'm like, all right, you can do whatever the hell you want. I won't even scout your side of the map. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do ahead of time. I said, I'm going to have 6 queens and 6 defilers and a balanced army ready for you. And let's see if you can beat me. And all 3 of them working together cannot beat a pro gamer Zerg. And they can be A plus or A minus, and all 3 of them working together. I don't even have to scout them. I can mop the floor with all 3 of them. And that's how fights are too. Some people can flat out curb stomp you no matter how good you think you are. They can curb stomp 2 or 3 of you no matter how good you think you are. And my older cousin Delvin proved that to me one day. I beat, like I said in the other video, I can beat 2 of my sensei's 2nd degree black belts in a handicap match working against me. They start at a 45 to 90 degree angle and just try to close distance and attack me. And the first thing I do is go on offense against the weaker of the 2 and use him as a human shield against the stronger of the 2 is what I do. All right. I can beat them into submission, and I've done it several times before in a real fight. All right. And they are every bit as good as the U.S. Marine Corps instructors and the Navy SEALs, because guess what? One of my senseis taught the Marine Corps instructors, all right? And they beat the UFC champions in stand-up, all right? So they're every bit as good as one of them. Well, both my sensei and his best student were all retired Marines anyway, all right? And it had actually taught other Marines the close combat system and Isshinryu Karate. All right. So they beat the Marines and I beat them. All right. And I can beat them in a 1-on-2. Is how good I used to be at 20 years old. And I can probably still beat them 1-on-1, even in this condition. But the rules do not help a noob beat an expert, and taking the rules away does not help the noob beat an expert. I explained that already, but I'm just going back to that. All right. Because pro gamers, so-called, in StarCraft, do not ever build queens. They virtually never build queens unless it's an accidental click. And I'm like, do you realize how big a dumbass you are? You don't realize there's a value in a unit that slows down your opponent's army by 50% and reduces its attack speed by 50% for the ensnare ability? I'm like, you don't realize the value of the spawn broodling ability that kills a siege tank in one hit? I was like, if the Terran player actually knew what he was doing, because I used to beat the pro gamer for you, but it took me a month of practicing against him before I figured out how to beat him. And the only way you can beat him is to make queens, because you cannot stop his tank push, his tank and marine push, without the queens. Period. You will die no matter what else you try to do. Believe me, I tried about 300 times to beat him without queens. And then I figured out the only way you can stop a marine tank push when an expert is doing it is with queens. You need one queen for every tank he meets, and you need to scout him and know exactly what he's doing, or you will not beat him. And he wasn't even the best Terran player around. All right. But I eventually got where I could beat him every single game. And he was a pro gamer. And so I laugh at the Zerg pro gamers in StarCraft 1, just like I laugh at UFC fighters, all right? Because I'm like, you literally do not know what you're doing. I was like, and the Terran player you're playing against does not know what he's doing. It's like, if you knew what you were doing, you would make queens whether or not the Terran made tanks. And if the Terran knew what he was doing, he would make at least 2 siege tanks every game just to see whether or not you made queens. Because all he needs to beat you is 2 tanks if you don't make queens. All right? So that's how the game works. It's literally designed that way. And they never end up in that situation. I'm like, neither of these players has a clue in the world what they're doing. And I would absolutely mop the floor with either of them 1-on-1. And I've done it. I've beaten them. All right? So a fight is the same way. I watched the UFC, and I just found out from Ramsey Dewey yesterday that wrist locks are actually still legal in the UFC. That doesn't violate the no grabbing the glove rule. I thought it did, because I've never seen them in 20 years use wrist locks. So I'm like, and I was like, if they're legal, why doesn't anybody use it? And he said, well, because it's a low percentage ability. And I'm like, I don't believe you, because the way I beat my sensei's 2nd-degree black belts is I get a wrist lock on the first one and keep his body between me and the second one. I get the wrist lock every single time, no matter how he sets it up. He can tell the big one to attack me first. He can tell the little one to attack me first. He can tell 3 of them to attack me, and I'd still get it on one of them. All right? And they're not cream puff black belts. They would beat the living hell out of anybody in a street fight, period. All right, because he trained the freaking Marine instructors. That's what I'm talking about. So that's what his 2nd-degree black belts are. All right, and I was telling Ramsey do it. I was like, I don't believe you that wrist locks don't work in the UFC. I said, something's wrong. Either they don't know what they're doing, or they are banned, because they never use them. And I was like, I can't beat those guys without using wrist locks, because the only way I can beat him is to actually lock him down and keep him from using his speed against me. And the only way I can beat the big one is to lock him down and keep him from using his strength against me. Because the wrist locks, the grappling side of Isshinryu, the Isshinryu's half of Isshinryu, beats both the speedster and the strong guy. All right? That's the advantage of grappling. It negates the speedster's speed, and it negates the strong guy's strength. All right? That's why Isshinryu is both a punching style and a grappling style. It was one of the first styles that attempted to combine punching and striking and grappling into one style. That was 80 years ago, before UFC became a thing. All right. So the only way you can win a 1-on-2 handicap is to have both grappling and striking. All right. It takes both. And the first thing I do is get one of them in a wrist lock and keep his body between me and the other one until I beat him into submission, until he taps out or yells, I quit. And then I throw him into the other one. And then whenever he gets out of the way, I beat the other one 1-on-1. That's what I was doing to them. It's actually pretty easy once you get the concept. And I'm teaching you how to beat a 1-on-2 handicap. all right, against second-degree black belts. And I'm not talking about paper black belts. This is not a McDojo. These people would, Darren would win the 155-pound weight class in the UFC pretty easily, in fact. And I got to where I could beat him like he was a cream puff, and he was not. He would beat the hell out of those guys. He was the second best fighter in the dojo other than myself. All right? And the other thing is, a real martial arts dojo does not have 10 or 20 black belts in it like you see these black belt factories in it. A real martial arts dojo probably only has 2 or 3 black belts other than the chief instructor and maybe his wife, all right, or her, or however that's set up. But these black belt factories that are shitting out 10 or 20 black belts that are paper black belts make me laugh even harder than the UFC. If you had a real teaching standards, you're not going to find 10 or 20 people that are good enough to actually be a real black belt in one dojo. It just does not happen. I've been in multiple martial arts dojos, and the real ones only have 2 or 3 black belts in it, where anybody knows anything that's worth being a black belt. If they're a paper black belt, you might have 20 black belts up in there, but they're all shit. All right. So that's the other thing. These black belt factories, including jiu-jitsu black belt factories, because I can tap out 2nd and 3rd degree jiu-jitsu black belts using what I learned in Isshinryu Karate. They flat out can't beat me, and they sure as hell can't beat me in stand-up. But I'm no worse than 50-50 against them on ground game. And I actually have a winning record, a lifetime winning record against 2nd and 3rd degree Gracie black belts at pure grappling. And I just walked in there blind and could beat them at least 50% of the time, and usually more often than not. And I'm talking about the ones that were pro fighters with anywhere from 6 to 20 professional wins, and I tapped them out 3 times in a row. I tapped the middleweight, or actually he was a welterweight. I tapped him out 3 times in a row, 2 of them one-handed, and then the heavyweight, who was barely qualified for heavyweight and was almost a super heavyweight, he was a natural 265 pounder. I tapped him out one-handed 2 times. All right, verbally submitted him 2 times one-handed with UFC legal moves, which he tried to claim weren't UFC legal. And I've looked at the unified rules, and the moves are not banned. And I tapped him out one-handed, and he had to verbally submit to me. One time while he was standing up, he had to verbally submit to me because it hurt so bad what I did to him. And then the other time, we were in a ground grappling, and I got on top of him, and I one-handed grabbed this muscle group right here on here because he had a really big neck muscle right here. I don't know what it's called, but I one-handed grabbed that and just cranked on it and pulled out like that, and he verbally submitted. And then after the fact, he's like, I don't know if that's legal or not. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's legal. But he had to verbally submit to it. That he could not do anything. It hurt him so damn bad that he had to verbally submit. And he was a 3rd degree Gracie black belt and a 265 pounder. And he was in good shape at that time in 265 pounds and had 6 professional wins. All right. So, adding rules, because if you go in a Gracie dojo, there's all kinds of rules. If you're not a blue belt, you're not allowed to use joint locks. If you're not a Gracie blue belt, you're not allowed to use joint locks in a Gracie dojo. You're not allowed to throw strikes during 99% of their exercises. So, and I told him, I was like, something that you think works because you only do use it in grappling. I'm like, something you think works in a grappling versus grappling scenario does not work at all in a full contact scenario. It doesn't even help you. You'll get your face pounded in while you're trying to do that bullshit to somebody, especially in a real no-rules street fight. And I tell them all the time, you cannot win a 1 versus 2 using Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in a real street fight. It's not happening. While you're wrestling with one guy, the other guy's going to club you in the back of the head. You have to be able to throw strikes, and real strikes. I'm talking about pro-level strikes, 750 to 1,000 plus pounds, or you're not going to win a 1 versus 2 against grown men in a handicap match, which you need to do for a real self-defense situation. You need to be able to clobber the first guy in 1 or 2 hits and take him out like that, or you have little or no chance against the guy that's going to club you in the back of the head. And Gracie Jiu-Jitsu does not help you win that at all. It'll get you killed. They claim that's for self-defense, and I've told them flat out, that does not work in a self-defense situation. That will get you flat out murdered. All right, I guess I'm done with this video. It's a little bit of a rant against some stupidity in martial arts, both in the UFC and Gracie dojos, especially because Gracie Jiu Jitsu is a complete joke. They're not as good at grappling as Isshinryu Karate people are, and they're shit at striking. They're like D- at striking.